Hi, I'm Victor Vogel. Normally, I talk to you about leadership and interpersonal communication, but tonight I'd like to put a different hat on. When I first retired back in 2007, I spent the next 10 years of that time creating and developing what I call a personal protection educational awareness program. What that program was about was working with some law enforcement, some hardened criminals, and other people to identify exactly what the common, average, everyday citizen needs to know in order to protect themselves against violent crime. I had a feeling, and I was projecting back in 2012 when I wrote my book on this subject called Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone, that there was going to be increased violence over the next decade. I just didn't know how much I was right. So here we are now, today, in one of the most contentious elections in our history, one of the most important elections in our history, and frankly, now one of the most dangerous elections in our history. So, what I did is I took the information that I provide in my books to everyday citizens, not people who were in the military or in law enforcement who maybe had exposure to a deadly force encounter. So they know how they're going to react. They've been there, it's happened to them. But to the everyday person who goes through life never 98%, maybe 100% of the time, not experiencing any violence or crime whatsoever. Uh, and that's going to be the vast majority of you and how it's going to impact you. But for those, if you've ever watched TV after a mass shooting, who say, I just never thought it could happen here, and I never thought it could happen to me. And this is after seeing year after year after year mass shootings reported in quantity we just don't want to think about. So there should be no reason why you would say, I just didn't think it could ever happen here, because it can happen here. Is it likely to? No, I don't want you running around being scared to death. But if it did, would you be ready, is the question. So if you can be ready and you can avoid the situation, then that's the best possible outcome for you. Uh, and you should feel comfortable that you understand and what you need to do and how you need to protect yourself. So that's what that 10 years was all about. And we conducted some webinars and some seminars. I talked to hardened criminals about how they do things. And I mean, some hardened criminals, uh, and some people who've done some violent things. I talked to law enforcement officers. I've talked to federal agency people. Most of all, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people and asked them how they protect themselves, or do they protect themselves. And that was probably a vital part of me wanting to continue to write the book and put it out there, because there's so many people who are unaware and just don't think about it because they never experienced it. They haven't experienced it all their life, and they haven't. But unfortunately, we don't live in the era I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, and where you could get on your bicycle and your kids could go downtown to the movie and come back or whatever, and you never worried about them. We don't have that luxury today. There's just too much violence, too much opportunity for people to create violence. So what I did here, this is voting season, and normally it's, everybody's talking, they're having debates, and they're discussing what's right, what's wrong, all those kinds of things. And they do it civilly over drinks or at parties or whatever. even within families. This year's different. This year is again tainted with violence, primarily because of one of the candidates that's running, but also in general, the environment that's been created is one of violence and threats. So I took my book and took out a few things and just took a few minutes and sort of did a general threat assessment about voting and how I would protect myself and how I plan to protect myself when I go to vote. And unfortunately, afterwards, because it doesn't end at the voting. We've seen that. We had the most violent time we've ever had when an insurrection to overthrow our government happened on January 6th of 2021. So it's not just prior to voting, it's not just voting, and it's not just after we voted that we can relax and say, okay, it's done. I don't have to wash my hands. I don't have to think about it. So, this presentation, I'm going to give you some tips that can help you stay safer when it comes to this voting cycle we have today. So, let me take you over there to some of that. Voting protection strategy. This is what my book talks about. It talks about how to build protection strategies for various scenarios. You can't think about, just write down 5 places you go regularly and then ask yourself, are these places that have actually had mass shootings? Everything from hair salons to restaurants to nightclubs to concerts to theaters. There just doesn't seem to be any place safe anymore. So, a good thing to be able to do is pre-think your protection, not your self-defense. If you're trying to pepper spray somebody or shoot somebody or use martial arts on somebody, if you ever get very good at any of those things, which is highly unlikely for the average citizen, but if you ever do, uh, uh, you're already in the middle of a fight, and that is a lose-lose scenario. You may win the fight, but there's some losses associated with winning the fight. Some people go to jail because they don't know when to shoot and not to shoot somebody. They haven't taken, they got their permits. It was told to them, and they just plumb forgot about it all there. And they didn't have any insurance to cover their legal fees and all that. Anyway, a lot of that has happened in America too. We've had law enforcement officers, people who are trained in deadly force encounters, actually become a little unhinged because they have never been in one and ended up shooting somebody they shouldn't have shot. And now they're in jail for that. So, or how they handle the situation. So, those are all things that I kind of cover in the book in terms of understanding what's going on with violence in the world today. And I think that's important for people to know. So let's talk about voting. Let's see here. Let me get where I can. Um, there we go. Why do you need voting protection strategy? Well, first of all, federal law enforcement's issued a heightened threat warning focused on voting intimidation and violent threats for people who are going to vote. Throughout this whole cycle of voting. So that includes prior to, during voting, and after voting until the inauguration. So there is a heightened threat, and it's not just from domestic people. There are foreign actors who are trying to encourage and radicalize people to create violence during this election season. So there is a heightened alert. So it's not like I'm sitting here saying there's a problem. Your federal law enforcement, local law enforcement agencies, if they're doing their job, are also have these threats that they need to be looking for. Voter suppression is rampant in many states across this country. This election is critical, and there's factions who would just love for you never to go to vote at all because they want you to be fearful of voting. They want to make it difficult for you. They want to make you feel like there's a threat to your life or you could have bodily harm to you if you show up at a voting area. Uh, so these are things you need to be aware of that are actually going on right now. And law enforcement and various people are working on minimizing those to make it safe for you to go vote. So it should be, but here are some tips that can kind of help you go through some of this. Also, there were two attempts on Donald Trump's life. And he's now asking the United States government for more protection outside of the Secret Service, deeper protection, and an actual military aircraft to transport him around so he'll feel safer going from place to place. So that that's a pretty good indicator that he's sensing there's some violence that could be happening, intensified violence over the next few weeks and perhaps after the election also. So, what are some of the common sources that can create violence or create a situation where violence could happen? These are sources of conflict, so to speak. And these are things that you can do out in front to kind of minimize any of this happening. That's what protection is about. It's not self-defense. It's proactive. It's telling you that you don't want this stuff to be happening. So, voter registration is one thing you need to be focused on right before, even now, while we're starting to vote early. Check with your local registration office and make sure you still are listed to vote. Yeah, there's a link, and I will put that in this video that you can go to that will take you to your state. You can I actually went and saw that I am registered to vote in Oklahoma, where I am. But guess what? The voting place that I was voted last year has changed. It's much closer to me this year. So I have a changed precinct where I go vote. And so I would know that number and I'll need to know where that is and that location. So, how to get there. Make sure you identify the voting site and make at least one trip to that voting site, before you go vote. So you know what's going on. When you get there, you understand what the issues about parking might be. You understand the entrances and exits to those areas. Those become critical if something happens to go wrong inside the voting arena. Um, if somebody happens to get in with a firearm, knowing where exits and entrances are kind of nice to know in advance in case you want to get the hell out of there. Okay, so this is true. I don't care whether you go to a restaurant, whether you go to a theater, whether you go to a concert, how you're going to ingress or how you're going to get into the building or the area and how you can get out if something happens is awful nice things to know in advance. So it's always nice to know a little bit about where you're going. Go visit. You trust. If you got a car, it's a lot easier. If you don't have a car, try to figure out a way to get there. Have a friend take you or something, just so you're familiar with that whole area and what's going on. And you can kind of almost sense where trouble scenarios can be. Exits and entrances and exits are one of those areas you really want to know about. Most voting websites have a link to your state. So this will allow, I don't know what the three Ds were down there. It's probably my inefficiency at editing, but I claim old age. Uh, anyway, uh, they go to this link. Make sure you're registered. Make sure everything is fine. You know where you're going. Go visit there. Get all that information. You'll feel much more comfortable when you go to vote. Okay, so that's kind of pre-voting. Now, when we go to vote, there's some things you need to be thinking about too. First of all, the safest way to vote, and by far the best way to vote, is by mail. If you have the option to vote by mail, vote by mail. Now, if you have trouble with that, if you can't understand something about how to do that, or if there's a lot of technicalities about that, have somebody help you do that. Make sure you understand the laws that your state has relative to voting by mail so that you follow the law when you do this. There's some very specific things that some states put that you have to put on the outside of an envelope exactly a certain way. These are voter suppression issues that states have put into laws to keep people for their vote from counting. So if you're going to vote by mail, just make sure you really understand how to do it and you're comfortable in how to do it and you follow the law when you do it and drop it in the mail, and then you've done everything you can do to vote by mail. We have found these to be very safe and accurate and uh, a way that your vote will be counted. It's a fairly safe way to do it. It's actually the best way to vote. If you can't vote by mail, we now are voting early, which means we're going at a period of time where we can go and it's more convenient. There's less crowds, etc., because people are beginning to vote early. It allows the people who are counting the votes to be able to count them more efficiently and more effectively with less errors. There's less pressure. So if you're going to vote early, then you probably want to vote during the day that the least amount of people are going to be voting. Maybe a two, or maybe not Tuesday, any day during the week when people tend to be working, like 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. If you have those options and you can talk your boss into letting you off for an hour to go vote, it's probably not going to take you more than an hour to go vote. Um, those are good times to go vote. That's when I do it. I go. I'm retired, so I can go just about any day of the time. But if you can vote early at the site, at the precinct site, uh, and or you can mail your vote in early, or you can drop it off at the registrar's office, wherever that happens to be in the city or you're in your precincts, or wherever you can drop, or if there are drop boxes, it's very specific ideas about what you have to do to drop it off and all those kinds of. If you're doing all that correctly, make sure you understand how to do it correctly. Voting early, voting by mail is by far the safest way to vote. Okay? Check in advance to make sure you have when you're going to vote. Check in advance to make sure you have all the ID you will need so there are no arguments as the process begins to vote. You go through the line of being validated, then you go through the line of getting your ballot, all that stuff. If you have the right information, and double check and make sure everything is current and up to date. So if you happen to get there, you might want to take extra ID. If you happen to get there and the license for some reason isn't appropriate, you can pull out your passport or something, other ID that is valid ID to say who you are. It's just better to be over prepared and be able to um, minimize any challenges to you voting when you're at the voting area. So make sure you have all that stuff. Put it in a baggie or something where have it all there and you can just take it out when they ask for it, pull out what you need. That may be overdoing it. You may, just have to have your license and maybe another piece of ID with you in case you need it, but you may not need it. And hopefully you won't. It'll be validated. You'll go get your ballot, you'll vote, you'll walk right on through fairly quickly. But it's always good to check this stuff in advance. Get a copy of your ballot from that online website, and be very familiar with the ballot. I don't know what the state laws are relative to what you can and cannot take into the voting booth, but if you're able to take that copy and complete it in advance, think through it in advance, then when you get your ballot and you go into the ballot box, if you're able to take that copy and make sure you can do that, there's no law preventing you from doing that, to take that copy out of your pocket, open it up, and simply check it off exactly the way you did on your copy on the ballot, put it back in your pocket and go. That's the fastest and best way. If you have that availability, that's the best way to complete the ballot quickly, to get in, go through the line quickly, get your ballot, complete the ballot quickly, put it in the machine, and leave. That's a fairly, your objective here is not to spend any more time in the voting area than you need to. Okay, let's see. Let me go back here. There was one here. Okay, then you want to leave immediately after voting. Don't stay in chat. Tell no one, including your family, friends, or whatever, how you voted. Um, this is probably the best advice I can give you. Just keep your vote to yourself. It's over. It's done. Nothing anybody can change your vote, so there's no reason for them to be upset about how you voted because you can't change it. So the best thing to do here is just take the Fifth Amendment for voting. I don't have anything to say about how I voted. I don't want to discuss it. It's over. I just want to now go on and live my life, and we'll see how it turns out. So don't ask anyone how they voted. And I'm telling people, don't go around wearing the I voted sticker. That's a basically indication for somebody to come up and ask you how you voted. Um, and then you got to go through the whole explanation why you don't want them to vote. So if you don't have that sticker on, they don't know whether you voted or not. They're not going to be asking you any questions or querying you. It's good to be excited to wear you know to be excited about voting and all of that going up to once the vote's done. There's really no reason to be showing people you voted. You either did or you didn't. It shouldn't matter to them one way or the other because they don't have any control over your vote. So these stickers are in these can be antagonizers to some people who, or at least an opportunity for them to ask you how you voted, and you want to stay away from that kind of information. So, what do you wear when you go vote? And most people don't even think about this. They're so excited about being for Trump or Biden. I mean Harris. Um, uh, they're just excited about voting for their candidates. So they want to show everybody that they're doing that. Don't wear anything that signifies who you'll be voting for when you go to the voting booth. At this point, pride is more harmful than actually being helpful because you're not going to be changing anybody's mind that day. You're most likely not going to convince someone to change how they're going to vote and who they're going to vote for. What you are doing is you're offering an opportunity for dialogue or debate or argument that can accelerate into something that can be more violent. So Be nondescript, don't wear hats or shirts or buttons or pins or anything that indicates who you're voting for. Just go vote. That's the only reason you're there, is to get in and get the ballot, complete it, get it into the machine so it counts, and leave. After that, there's actually no rationale to continue any more dialogue. There's nothing anybody can do at that point. But it can be a source or a point for aggravation or excitement. Don't engage in conversation about politics while you're there, or who you will be voting for during or after you vote. This is the time to just, you're done. You're finished with it. It's over. Do not respond to prompts to argue about politics or who's the best and continue those arguments or debates. Do not accept an interview with anyone, a reporter or social media individual seeking your input. If they come up and stick a mic in your face, it's really simple. I've got no comment. They understand they're not going to get anything out of you with that. I mean, they hear it enough from politicians and everybody. That's it. I'm done. I have no comments. Uh, don't get yourself in the position of being seen on Facebook or the news or somewhere, arguing for and making some comment somebody takes the wrong way. Okay, then there's between voting and inauguration. You would think, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm voting, it's all over, everything's cool. No, it's not. And we've seen this in the 2020 election leading up to the riot and the attempted overthrow of our government on January 6th. A lot is happening, and you can see it right now in the way that the Republicans and Donald Trump, for example, are positioning the fact that this is not a valid election. So it's beginning, just like it did in 2020, they're beginning to say, we're not going to win. If we don't win, we're not going to, have a transfer of power. We don't want to recognize it'll be illegal, and people need to mess with it. So it's best after you vote that you don't attend any public or large crowd elections, watch events, or I know they're fun. I know they're a great place to meet people. They're also soft targets for mass shooters. And my guess is all those places have minimal security to protect you against anybody walking in with a country that's armed to the teeth, walking into one of these parties and opening fire on a large group of people there who are having fun and totally unsuspecting. I mean, everybody's in there drinking, everybody's having a good time, they're laughing. No one's paying attention to somebody who walks in with an overcoat that, they shouldn't. It's a little too hot to be wearing or something like that. Nobody sees that when they're excited about drinking, etc. Maybe somebody who's in there starts drinking and loses control of their mental faculties and goes nuts. So there's all kinds of things that can go wrong with this situation. You voted, it's done. Just don't go, don't get so excited about continuing this effort to promote Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. It's over. You've already voted. There's nothing else anybody can do. If you're going to hold these parties, if you're going to attend a private party, do it privately at somebody's house or some private building that isn't public in nature. But if you're going to do that, the election at this point in time is basically over. Okay, if you're watching a watch party, it's past Tuesday, the 5th of November. Pull the signs, pull anything that indicates that you might have a group of people celebrating or watching uh, whether Kamala Harris has won or not. Okay, pull the signs. There's no need to have those signs out in the yard anymore. There's no need to tell people that you're holding a party about hoping Kamala Harris wins. Just go inside, have the party, and hope she wins, but don't broadcast it to everybody else out there by having yard signs or all kinds of flags out that have names on them or something like that. Get all of that stuff out of your yard. Go ahead and have your party privately and have your watch party, and that's fine. I would stay away from public events this year. Refrain from any comments, private or public, relative to the election, regardless of who the winner is. Just whoever the winner is, that's who the winner is. And if there is a problem with that, there are recourses and legal channels for that. Don't get involved in having those discussions in public places or antagonistic environments that can create hate or discontent within your family, your friends, or even those people who you don't know in a bar or somewhere like that. Just refrain from talking about politics. It's over, it's done. Whatever that is, it's up to the people counting the votes and the people reporting the votes and Congress to certify the votes. You don't have any influence over that at this point in time. It's done. So just stay away from that kind of stuff. So let me come back here for a second to this last slide. I have a shaking disease that sometimes I hit things twice before I'm ready to get out. Uh, I want to thank you for watching this, and I want you to stay safe, stay alert, and more than ever, if you see something suspicious, say something to law enforcement before it becomes a real threat. Now, if you don't understand how to identify something suspicious and whether that could be a potential threat, and you're uncomfortable reporting it, then I encourage you to go to these Amazon links and particularly get my book on creating a bad guy free zone. Because there's one chapter in there specifically about suspicious behavior and how to react to that. There's another chapter in there on how suspicious behavior, when suspicious behavior should be considered a threat and what to look for. And it's not just people, it could be things, it could be places or events, and it can be people. So I cover all of that in that area. So that'll help you understand that a little more as an average citizen because you probably don't know. Um, I spend a lot of time talking about methods of operations for both criminals and terrorists or anybody who has a violent intention. They basically have the same model they follow. And there are a lot of the things they do that are indicators in advance that they're going to do something. And if you understand what those things are, you understand what might be relevant for you to tell law enforcement and not feel uncomfortable with that. There's so many of these things that could have been prevented, but somebody was just skeptical. They were concerned about reporting someone because they weren't sure. And this environment sure isn't your red line. It's if you even think it's suspicious, you want to report it. And if it isn't, it'll, law enforcement will investigate it and it'll come out as not being suspicious. So down below here, yeah, are two books. One is Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone, and that's the Amazon link to that book. Um, on the other side of that book is I used to do a lot of international traveling as a consultant, and travel in general, both domestic and international. And there's a lot of things once I got into the security side of things that I was talking about here. Um, I found out there's a lot of things that you probably should be doing, particularly if you're going to travel internationally in advance of going to that travel site and while you're at the travel site, some tips. This is almost like what I would call a pilot's checklist for traveling. You want to do these things before you go. You want to do these things while you're en route. You want to do these things if you happen something happens to you while you're at a particular area in an international in a country. There's a lot you want to know about the laws, a lot you want to know about where the hospitals are, what the rating on the hospitals are. A lot of people go over, they do not think about the insurance. If there's something happened to them, they were going to be hospitalized for 30 days and trying to get out of that hospital and get back to the United States to their hometown and their hospital there to continue treatment is an extremely, extremely expensive adventure if you don't take out certain insurance for international travel that may cover some of those costs. Uh, there's a lot of things like that in that book that are just helpful tips, and like you can buy the book and then it's cheap enough, I think, that you could go down and just check it off and write that stuff in, carry the book with you, and like look up the closest hospital and what their rating is and what what's involved with insurance or no insurance if they happen to be a nationalized healthcare system. There's a lot of things like that once you know in advance, chances are you'll never pull that book out and look at it again after you do the work. But if something happened to someone while you're on the trip or they got sick or whatever, you're not running around trying to look this information up while that person's suffering. You simply pull out your book, you call this hospital, and you arrange to come over and visit that hospital. And you're going to the one that you feel comfortable is going to provide you the treatment. And not all the hospitals in other countries are all that great. So you don't have a lot of the same uh, privileges you do here in the United States. Some of them you have more. So those are things that you need to be considering. So both of those books are on there. I think they're on Kindle. So in some cases, if you're Kindle, you're reading it. You can read it and not even. I don't. I think there's some points and times. I don't know what your Kindle subscription is, where it's free or it's $3 or something. These are not expensive books to read, but they're vital. They're vital information for you to understand. So I hope this has proved helpful to you. Thanks for watching it. Stay safe. Go vote. Go vote. It's okay. You can do this. So go vote. Try encourage you to follow the tips. Follow the tips. You'll feel more comfortable voting. Till next time, I'm Vic Vogel. Visit my YouTube channel, Building Renaissance Leaders. There I talk about leadership and I talk about communication. Have a good evening.